if you'd gone there at that time, the population would have broken down like this. About 75% Muslim, 20% Christian, and 5% Jewish. But all of them were Arabs. Virtually all the people were Arabs, which sounds strange to people here because we're trained to think of the Jewish-Arab conflict and so forth. But the Jewish people, and the Jewish people there, when they heard about the idea of the political Zionist project, they were opposed to it. The indigenous Jewish population was completely opposed and viewed it as something that would cause a great worsening of relations between the peoples who lived in the region. So when they had their first Congress of the World Zionist Movement, the delegates who came together had a debate. And they debated, where should we try to establish our state? And some of them argued in favor of Uganda, which was in East Africa and part of the British Empire. And this was more favored by the man who was the leader, named Theodore Herzl. And today, his picture is everywhere in the state of Israel. He's considered the father of the state of Israel. So he was more for Uganda. The other ideas were for Argentina, which was technically independent but under British domination, but they were more leaning toward Palestine, based on, biblical references and so on and so forth. But they didn't know anything about Palestine. So the Congress sent off a delegation of two people. They were two rabbis to Palestine to see what the situation was. And the rabbi sent back a telegram that's famous in history that I quote in the book, very short telegram. It said, "The bride is indeed beautiful, but she is married to another man." Meaning, Palestine is a beautiful area, but somebody else lives there. And what's so important about this, and why I bring it up, is that one of the myths that was a foundational myth, a central myth for the Zionist movement and the establishment of the state of Israel was that Palestine was a land without people for a people without a land. But, as you can see, the first World Zionist Congress, 50 years before the establishment of the State of Israel, the people who were to go on to lead the formation of the State of Israel knew that another people lived there. And how do we explain that? Well, I think it's explained in this way, that on the one hand, the Zionist movement arose as a reaction to anti-Jewish racism, but when it arose, it, like all of the other European settler movements, the movements that came out from Europe, whether the British to Australia, or the Dutch and the British to South Africa, or the French to Algeria, or the people who settled this country, all shared a Euro-supremacist understanding, a Euro-supremacist view, or what we might more today refer to as a white supremacist point of view. So that's a contradictory character of it. On the one hand, it's a reaction to racism. On the other hand, it incorporates within itself a racist concept. And that would be like, as I say, all of the settler movements that came out of Europe share this. And it was a consciously colonial movement. The idea was, we will settle in some part of the colonized world and establish our state there. And one of the central leader, as I said, was this man named Herzl. And Herzl understood that in order to succeed, in order to have any chance of success, their movement would have to get the support of one of the already existing empires. So they tried a few of them, but they settled on the British Empire, which was the big empire in the world at the time. They said the sun never set on the British Empire. And he wrote a letter to a man named Cecil Rhodes. He wrote many, many letters. Cecil Rhodes was the guy who was the British architect of colonialism in Africa. There used to be countries in Africa named after him. Northern Rhodesia, which is today Zambia. Southern Rhodesia, which is today Zimbabwe. He was a big figure, and he was known as an arch-racist as well. He writes in this letter, here's part of the letter. "You are being invited to help make history. It doesn't involve Africa, but a piece of Asia Minor," meaning what, the modern Middle East. "Not Englishmen, but Jews. How then do I happen to turn to you? Because it is something colonial." So in other words, you should support us because we are colonizers the way that you are colonizers. This is the consciousness of the leaders of the Zionist movement, that they are indeed colonizers. But they couldn't just say to the leaders of the empires, support us in our project because we are oppressed people. Because they're speaking to empires, of course, right? I mean, the leaders of the empire, if they were honest, would respond, yeah, we understand that concept of oppressing people. That's what our business is. We're empires. You know, we have big empires. So there had to be something that they offered in return. A quid pro quo. We'll do this for you if you do that for us. And so here's an expression of that. Herzl, the first leader, died. He's succeeded by another man named Chaim Weizmann. And on the eve of World War I, he writes a letter to an English newspaper, typical of many letters he wrote. And this is what it said. Should Palestine fall within the British sphere of influence, and should Britain encourage Jewish settlement, we could develop the country, bring back civilization to it, and form a very effective guard for the Suez Canal. So there, in a few words, are two ideas I'm talking about. One is the Euro-supremacist idea, right? We could bring back civilization to it. As if there wasn't a long-established civilization there. In fact, I make a point of saying at all these presentations because there's so much anti-Arab racism now and so much Islamophobia that's rampant, that we today in the West would know virtually nothing about antiquity, meaning we would know virtually nothing about Greek or Roman mythology, all these things that are treated as part of the Western tradition. If that knowledge had not been kept alive in the Islamic centers of learning at the time that Europe was in the Middle Ages and when a great deal of that history was lost. That's how we know about it. So the idea that they needed to bring back civilization to it is a Euro-supremacist idea. And the other part of the idea is the second thing that I was just talking about. He's offering that they could form a guard for the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal ran through Egypt, it still does. It was controlled by the British at the time, and it was kind of like pushing the British Empire's buttons to talk about the Suez Canal, because it was the lifeline. The great wealth of England did not come from England. The great wealth of England came from its colonies, and particularly from the colonies like India. And a lot of that wealth, that trade, came through the Suez Canal, which connected the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean and saved having to go around the Horn of Africa. So this is what they're saying, is they're saying, if you will support the establishment of our state there, then we will be a military guard for your vital interest in the region. And that's one of the main concepts that would continue, and I would say continues up to the present day, not in terms of the relationship of present-day Israel with Britain, but present-day Israel with the United States of America. And why every year billions of dollars of assistance, particularly military aid, go from the United States to Israel because of that relationship of protecting not so much the Suez Canal, but larger U.S. interest in the Middle East as a whole. So based on this campaign, after 20 years, it came to fruition. In 1917, in the middle of the war, the British Foreign Secretary, like the Foreign Minister, Secretary of State equivalent, issues a letter that's very famous in the history of the Middle East called the Balfour Declaration. And Balfour said, His Majesty's government, meaning the British government, view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. These words have been the subject of many, many, many books, just those few words, the analysis of what those words meant. But here's what one Palestinian scholar, Dr. Ismail Zaid, wrote about it. He said, it's interesting to note that the four-letter word, Arab, occurs not once in this document. To refer to the Arabs, who constituted 92% of the population, as the non-Jewish communities, is not merely preposterous, but deliberately fraudulent. Palestine did not belong to Balfour to assume such acts of generosity. So there's a lot in this. And here's a couple of things that are in it. The people who live there, the Palestinian Arab population, aren't even referred to by their name. They're just referred to by who they are not. And that's part of this concept of, the European concept and attitude toward the indigenous people. We don't really have to think about them except how to get them out of the way of what we want to do. And another point is that it says the British government supports the establishment of a national home. National means state, right? The establishment of a state for Jewish people in Palestine. But when it talks about the people who already live there, it says it supports their civil and religious rights. And civil rights and religious rights are not the same as national rights. So the Palestinian Arabs were very outraged when they read this. This was on November 2nd, 1917.